You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Representatives Carol Spackman-Moss and Corey Malloy. Great to have both of you with us. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
The governor had a busy week taking action on bills, signing a lot and vetoing one. We'll get into that one he vetoes, but let's start off with a bill that you might be familiar with. It's the Stand Your Ground bill. You actually sponsored that bill. Talk about first what it does.
What it does is it prevents triers of fact from asking the questions of someone who may be in court because they use self-defense. And it prevents them from asking them why they didn't retreat at the scene. And the reason for that is because they didn't have an obligation to retreat. And so this just stops the victimization from continuing on into the court system after they've already been a victim to someone's aggressive, violent behavior where they've had to defend themselves.
You voted no on this bill. Explain why.
Well, I didn't think it was necessary, first of all, and I think the courts ought to decide that. And it particularly troubled me because my colleagues who represent communities that are primary minority, like Representative Hollins and Senator Luz Escamilla, feel that people of color will be, and minorities will be more at risk because of Stand Your Ground, and that's what we've seen nationally. The Trayvon Martin case is a good example.
You obviously think there's a need for it. That's why you ran the bill. Talk about why you believe it's the right step for the state of Utah.
Well, I think it does protect people's rights to self-defense. It adds to that ability for someone to feel like they can be safe, that they can defend themselves. And I think the important thing to remember is this is for all Utahns who feel threatened, who feel that they might be in a situation where they need to defend themselves. And there can be any kind of incidents where someone feels threatened. They feel like they get into a situation where they need to defend themselves against someone who's trying to give them bodily harm.
Hit on that point, because what he's saying there is that even those of color and minorities, the law will apply to them as well, to where they can defend themselves.
Right, it will, but it takes away that idea that you can retreat if you want. Rather, just says you take that aggressive action if you don't have to retreat. And I think in a lot of cases, people can retreat. I mean, it's better than than killing someone if you can retreat. So again, I think it should be left to the courts. I don't think there's any need for it in Utah. We haven't had any cases that indicated that, and so, you know, it might be something that Representative Malloy thought was nice to have, but I didn't think it was necessary.
One last word on this. Why not retreat if you have the opportunity to do so?
Well, I think anybody, if you can get away and protect yourself, you should do it. I think the whole point is to be able to defend yourself, and running away or retreating is one option that you have to defend yourself.
Let's talk about the bill the governor vetoed. This one really started back when Representative Chaffetz decided he was going to step aside, and there was a bit of a power struggle between legislative leadership and the governor on how to move forward. So along comes this bill to make it clear, you know, parties should be the ones deciding. You voted in favor of this bill. Why do you think that's the right step forward?
Well, I think first and foremost, we needed a process in place. There wasn't a process in place, and that's why there was so much confusion and there was so much tension between the executive branch. And so I think this was a good bill to put in place. It acted quickly on finding a replacement that could be in place representing the state of Utah until we can have our next election cycle. And I think that's the main reason that I wanted to support that.
At the end of the legislative session, we looked at that bill and we saw that's probably one that could be high on the list for veto. You voted against it in the first place, though.
Right. Well, one of the things was that it took away the signature, the ability to get on the ballot with signature, and that was key to me. And right now, John Curtis is my congressman. I'm happy he is. And he would not have been on that ballot if he'd had to go through the caucus system only. So it gives more options. The public has made it very clear they like this dual path, and I think it's here to stay, and I think it would be a bad idea to change it now. So I'm pleased that the governor vetoed it.
Candidates that collect signatures have done well in the primary, more so than in the convention. So why take away that option to replace and fill a vacancy?
Well, right now the law is what it is, but I think when you're filling a vacancy, you want to fill it as quickly as possible. And to call upon the parties that the person vacating the office represents to provide names or nominees to the governor to assign is a good, quick way to do it.
I want to hit on that point because you mentioned that you like John Curtis as your representative, but there was a long span in between the time that Representative Chaffetz left office and he was elected and sworn in the following January. Did it bother you that time in between where there was no representation?
No, that was a concern to me, but it furthered my anger at Congressman Chaffetz at the time for bailing basically on the public. You know, I'd put him more at fault. But in the end, I thought we got the better candidate of on the Republican side anyway, because the other one was much more extreme in his views. And that's what happens with the caucus only. I think on in both parties. The
governor signed a very controversial bill, one of the most controversial throughout the session. That would be the ban on abortion after 18 weeks. Opponents of that said, if you sign this into law, we're going to file a lawsuit, and they are following up on that. Are you concerned about the potential court battle and cost to the state for that? Oh yes, $3 to $5 million. When I think of all the needs in our state and all the people we heard from and committees that meet, and think what $3 to $5 million could do in human services, it's really not worth that money because we're pretty sure it'll be struck down. And the other thing is that if you may have seen an op-ed recently by a group of doctors, obstetricians, saying they were never called in, they were never part of any kind of discussion. And 18 weeks, you cannot tell a lot of fetal deformities, you know, like ones that aren't viable after birth. 20 weeks is much more reasonable. But I think it was a message bill, and I'm accustomed to seeing them. It was interesting to hear IHC get involved in this situation. They came up and testified on Capitol Hill for that very reason that you're talking about. You know, more time to really find out what could potentially happen. You voted in favor of this bill. She calls it a message bill. Is that what it is, a message bill?
Well, I definitely think it is a message bill in the fact that you know, a majority of the people of Utah are pro-life and want to see less of these babies losing their lives basically through the abortion process. So yeah, it doesn't really solve the issue of abortion, but it does send a signal, and it does make it to where there's a little bit more of a restriction on when and how they can get those abortions. And so as someone myself that's pro-life, I understand these situations can be very, very difficult. They're decisions. I'm not here to be judge, jury, and executioner. I know several women who have had abortions, and it was a big decision for them, very important, and I know that happens, but I think overall, I think we would like to see more of those little lives preserved.
So one of the arguments from supporters was, it's a new day, it's a new court, maybe this won't get struck down this time around. Well, maybe not, but if they're looking to be thinking this will get Roe v. Wade overturned, I think that would be a big mistake too, because there is a time and a need for some women to have abortions, and that should be decided between their doctor and the person. And I'm pro-life too. I mean, who's pro-abortion? And I'll tell you one thing, abortion is down all over the country and in Utah, and there's a reason for that. Better access to birth control. And we just saw a bill, I just read about a bill, you probably did today, that will go into effect soon, that will allow women to get birth control and contraceptives without a prescription. And that's the way we should be going. Let's help these women that are before they have an unwanted pregnancy. All right, unfortunately we've run out of time on that note, so that will be the final word, but I believe I gave you the first word, so it's fair to end on you. So appreciate your time. Great discussion. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.